All right, so Kathy and Mitch, we have been working on software called Web Command for a number of years now, and it's an entire platform that's basically designed for building content databases and web applications. So it's a framework and a platform, and it has its roots in content management. So we both work at a company where we provide content management systems, custom content management systems for different customers. And so that's sort of where the need came from for the system. And so it hasn't been released yet, but we're going to, it is in use in production for some of our clients. And it's going to be released as a platform as a service, so you'll be able to sign up online and spin up essentially a server and use this system like that with a free trial, and then you'll be able to kind of upgrade to a commercial system. But it's also going to be released in the first quarter of next year as free open source software as well. So you'll be able to go on GitHub and download all the source code. So what is a content database? A content database is basically similar to a relational database, your typical SQL database, but it's got some additional high-level features sort of built on top of that layer. And so we're going to go over each of these in more detail, so I won't dwell on them now, but it's object-oriented content. It gives you the ability to organize your content in things like folders and change their order and whatnot. It's got version control, workflow, what we call dimensions, which allows you to do things like localization, language translations, things like that, and temporal locks, which we'll get into.
All right, so I can talk a little bit about object-oriented content. A lot of our clients have simple web pages that we publish out, and they're just static pages, but over the years we've seen a need for web applications develop over time, and those, if you've ever built one, require really a lot of object-oriented constructs because they can be very complicated and grow over time, and you need to use good programming principles. Most databases are relational, enterprise ones at least, with a few exceptions, some for NoSQL, but when you want to build object-oriented content on top of a relational database, you have this problem with that mismatch where you can't really apply your nice OO concepts to a relational database. The way people solve that is with like an ORM or something like that, but if any of you have ever used one, you can build in the relationships to auto-generate your queries, but unfortunately it's very tedious. It's very hard to change if you ever need to make schema changes. And in general, it's just kind of a difficult manual and long process. So what we've done is actually created, I should put it together. So object-oriented content, what we've actually done is created a way for you to generate types in our schema. And then from there, the objects that we can interact with via an API or in a query are automatically created for you. So you never have to make that mapping ever again. We have the concept of object and content already in our system, but if you want to create, say, a person concept, you can create a collection of people, and then you can subclass that for presidents or any other kind of people that you want to put together. So you can also optionally add code and stuff like that to it. Our system's written in PHP, so we've got a little example there. But the really cool thing about our system is that we've created a query language on top of SQL. So you can write queries that look like SQL, but they're really against our schema that's kind of hidden and abstracted away from you. So when we say select from person plus, anybody who uses Postgres, it's kind of like the way they allow you to inherit from tables. So Postgres allows you to do like simple object inheritance, but we take it to the next level. So when you say from person plus, where name starts with C, you can see that you get two presidents back because presidents are people, as well as myself, who's also a person in the system.
Okay, so the other thing that it adds, it's not typically in a database. So a relational database, you typically have.
So we've lost our screen.
Did the wire get bumped?
Because it's just white noise. The old bad wire.
Seem to have sound now.
Yeah. Audio, so maybe we can turn that down.
Play it back in.
Yep. Turn it on again.
I have a T-shirt that says, "If I'm on life support and something goes wrong, plug me in, plug it back in."
I like that. It's awesome.
Reboot.
Yeah.
So most relational databases just have tables and rows in those tables. There's no concept like a file system where you can actually take the rows or the objects in those tables and organize them into a folder hierarchy or into separate collections, or give them relationships relative to each other without creating an actual column to store that information. So our system allows you to do that. So this is sort of just a screenshot, so you can see there's folders over on the left here that you can organize your content into, and then click on them. So there's still rows essentially in a database table conceptually, but you can still organize them in different ways automatically as part of the system. And then likewise, sometimes there's a relationship. So over on the left, there might be each row has a parent relationship, for example, and it will kind of express itself as a tree structure, so that you kind of get those things and that functionality for free, more or less, without having to do any special kind of software development.
So the content that we represent kind of as one piece to you. So if you say, give me a web page, or give me a title for a web page, or something like that, we actually are creating a nice kind of object-oriented look at several different rows in the database. So we've hidden all that away from you. So we actually have a way of allowing like real-time collaborative edits, kind of like Google Docs. So we have one record for that. So if everybody wants to work together and lock fields and work on fields together, we actually can do that through like a WebSocket connection through our web interface. We also have the ability to create multiple drafts. So if you don't want to maybe publish your content to the live site just yet, maybe you're still working on it, you can save multiple versions and go over it with your colleagues. And then we have also the live version that actually goes out to the data, or to the website, or to the live web application, or something like that. You can also keep multiple versions of that history. So if you want to be able to like look back for auditing purposes or anything like that, you can. And then finally, we also have a temporal locking system on the database too. So we keep transaction time so that we can actually manage who has things locked by what, if you want to, for example, bookmark the system for the future. So you can go in and put a bookmark in and say, I want to be able to query at this point in time, anytime in the future, but I want to look at this exact point in time. That's completely free in the sense that we don't have to replicate the database or create any kind of copies of snapshots. But whenever we save content, we just look and see if somebody wants to look at that point in time and you're about to advance the object to a new point in time, we actually save a copy, so you get totally repeatable read queries, basically.
So that comes in handy in like when we have a publish process, where you want to kind of say, I want to see the database at this moment in time, and then do something that might take hours to process. You can keep querying against that moment in time while the database is actually changing for other people that are reading and writing to it. So it's useful for that, but you can also create snapshot sort of backups at a moment in time if you want to be able to look back at it at that point in time.
And so Mitch mentioned dimensions. So what a lot of CMSs call that is localization. So if you want to create, a version of your website that would be shown in Spain in Spanish, or maybe in Mexico in Spanish, which might be slightly different or have slightly different aspects of it. CMSs call that localization, but we have decided to call it dimensions because we realize that you can make dimensions out of anything. It doesn't have to be languages and locales. It could be market segmentation. Like if you want your website for certain visitors to show maybe certain versions of web pages but slightly different language for other types of visitors based on maybe where they've been on the site so far, we've enabled that too. So you saw there were all these different rows for one single piece of content. This is even more rows, but we've abstracted all that away in our query language. So if you look at the top there, this is from president with Espanol or English or anything. What I'm really saying is show me any presidents, and if they have Spanish translations, show me those. If they have English, show me those. And if they have anything else, show me that instead. So we've tried to enable you to create basically any type of dimension that you want for your content, and then control the way that it cascades so that you make sure that you don't have like a blank spot.
And also you can have multiple dimensions. So you might get crazy and have, in English, you've got a version of the content for one market segment, and you've got another version for a different market segment. So you can kind of mix and match and cascade in your query, which version you want to have. It's also got built-in search functionality, so it does some indexing under the hood. This is actually leveraging a lot of the built-in functionality in a lot of SQL engines. So right now this sits on top of MySQL, but we've abstracted that so we'll be able to also support Postgres and many other systems. So it takes advantage of MySQL wherever it can, but then we kind of have layered on other functionality, and search is one of those things. So it has faceted search, and you can define custom search rules and do some really complex, interesting types of search. But ultimately, it exposes itself in our backend interface, but you can also access it through an API or web service calls to do a search on your website or some other system. So, as I mentioned, we're actually, while we haven't released the final version, it's production ready. We have about a dozen clients who are using it today, and we have more clients that will be transitioning to it from our previous version of the software. But so one of the places you can actually see it, and just to give you kind of a visual to what it can ultimately look like, is Boyden.com. It's one of our clients. It's an executive search firm. But so sort of to review some of those concepts that we talked about and kind of see them in action on the site, although it's a still screenshot, so it's not super dynamic. But they're a search firm, so they have offices all over the world, and so we've created objects that represent the offices and locations. They have practices, just like a law firm would, and then they have partners. And so all those are objects in the system, and they can have different translations of their biographies, for example, things like that. We use the hierarchy functionality to manage the sitemap, the web pages, how it's structured. They use versioning so they can roll back and make changes and also do staging edits and see how things are going to look before they go to the live site. They use dimensions for localization and also personalization, those market segments that I had mentioned. And they obviously use search, so you can search the site and you can search just a directory of partners, things like that. So with that, I'll close it out, but the website, there currently is a website online, but it's kind of a placeholder website because we haven't launched it yet, but you can go to it, and we invite you to do so. You can also click the Get Started button that you see on the left and actually launch a container and try this thing out if you want. There's also documentation on the site to try and help you get started, some rough videos, tutorials that'll walk you through it if you're interested, and we'd love to hear anybody's feedback. There aren't really, other than our clients that we've kind of migrated to this system, there aren't developers out there or database people out there using it. We'd love to kind of hear what you guys think and where maybe we have holes in our documentation and whatnot at this point. So that's it.
Any questions?
You use PHP.
Mm-hmm.
Is it adaptable for other languages?
You can use other languages. You can store other. It actually also has a scripting language of its own. It has actually multiple languages. There's a query language. There's a templating language. There's a scripting language. So if you don't want to depend on PHP, you want to sort of write something at a higher level that will can be processed across other languages, you can do that. And you can also store and publish other languages. So it's written in PHP. You can definitely work with many other languages and inside of it and publish those other languages. And it has a web services layer. So any language, which is pretty much every language, that can make a request to a web service and get a response back can access this database that way.
Can you leverage existing content like WordPress documents? WordPress.
You can. You would have to. You'd have to connect to a WordPress server, which typically is MySQL, and actually pull that content into the system. But we have import and export functionality sort of built right into it. So you can do a one-time migration of that content, or you can. You probably would, if you're going to use our system, you probably would want to do a one-time migration. Otherwise, you're just working with multiple databases, probably for not a huge benefit.
Okay.
Good question.
Would that snapshot query that you were talking about be something that, like, say, a teacher could use where a project was at a certain due date and then letter grade drops if it's past here, and so you're snapshotting to look and see what came in when without...
So you're saying if a student were to continue working on a project after the due date?
Yeah, but then it gets finished before the second cutoff, so you've got these predefined snapshots that you're going to look at in the future.
That's a really interesting point. You definitely could. Yeah, and it's in addition to storing data, you know, as I said, it's content focused. So you can actually store code, documents, anything you want in the system. And so you could say here at this cutoff time, and then you could review it, and it would allow people to keep working on content, code, and data. And you'd still be able to reference how it looked at that point in time. So yeah, that's interesting.
What's the largest data set you guys have deployed in this system right now?
Well, we have a couple specialized, very large data sets. So the largest data set is probably 3 million records, which is for geographic data, for mapping IP addresses to geographic locations. For example, that Boyden website that I brought up, when you go to that website, it sees your IP address, it figures out what their closest location is to you, and then displays information, it personalizes the page based on that location. So 3 million. So this is not a big data system. Flat out, you would not use this for big data. It's I wouldn't say it's a little data necessarily system, but it's not a big data system. So you're using it to really organize and it's data that's not a giant pool or lake of data. It's more an organized set of data that you want to be able to query on really efficiently in that sense.
Right.
So that's a good point.
So if you're using this with a 100 gig database, you're probably doing it wrong. Or a 100
Our
gig data
biggest one's
set.
like 60, so
Yeah, no,
there's
it's
a lot of
80. We have
applications.
an 80 gig database,
Yeah.
so it's big, but it's not like, it's not a big data style database. There's
Yep.
a lot of different tables and what we call content types. And, we're talking about, like the Boyden website, for example, probably 2,000 objects is what they have in their system. But it can handle very large data sets. And in that inheritance hierarchy, how the object is at the top and then content is underneath that, content adds all that version control functionality. So anything that any content type that you create that extends content is a little bit heavier weight and will be a little bit less performant because you get all of these other version control features. But for things like the geographic data that you don't need all of that functionality, you can extend object, and that gives you much more efficient, kind of closer one-to-one to like an SQL style query. So it can be very efficient, like an SQL database can be efficient. But yeah, again, it's not a big data style system.
That, you just mentioned IP-based display of your content. It always reminds me of the 90s when people were making their websites display different when an FBI IP address was asking for their site. But you mean like if there was English versions, but you saw, oh, somebody's logging in from New York City, it might use different word choices than if they were logging in from Houston or LA.
Exactly.
Totally
So
get it,
so
yeah.
you could also tune it in for language for computer scientist versus social scientist.
You could.
Yep.
Yeah, and you can use, in that example I gave, you use IP address, which maps to a geographic location, but your browser also sends a lot of other information, like what language you prefer and things like that. So you can kind of combine all of those things to make a choice.
Following up with your earlier thing, one of the things you could do is for educational applications, here's here's the instructor version of this content and here's the student version of content. So you would have the same downloadable data files for projects and things like that, but you'd have an entirely different set of instructions for even the same PowerPoint slides. You have an instructor's manual built into them.
Yeah, so that's a good point. And you could do it for the whole thing or per slide. You could have a different version. So Dimensions is one of those things, like we built it specifically to address localization, but when we built it, it's like, hey, this could be used for all sorts of stuff. So it's good to hear ideas like that we're not, we're not thinking about what other ways you can actually use it.
So you could have a button for old people. It says de-chirp all the acronyms because we don't remember what the hell they were. We need the actual words that represents. And they flop
I was
out.
young once.
Long form. Yeah, I don't know how you detect somebody's age, but I'm sure you could tap into Facebook or something.
Just ask them.
That's true. A lot of people just tell you.
I saw that here from the front side. Retro my ass.
I'm curious about the extent of localization in the sense, what it seems is that you're fetching data based on the locale. That's what I understood. What about when you move to areas where the languages are read right to left, or it is not left to right like English? How does your user experience adapt to such situations?
Sure, I don't know if you want to answer. The database is, it doesn't care. So it's basically kind of up to you as the developer how you're going to store it. So it can store, just like an SQL database can, it can store UTF-8 information. You can store it left to right, or you could store it however you want and then transform it when you display it. So our system doesn't really dictate that. It's kind of up to you. But we haven't in this version of the system. We have in the previous version stored left to right and whatnot. But it really comes down to just ultimately you publish it to a website or display it on a website, and you put the information in the HTML or the CSS code that indicates how to display it, and you can store it in whatever format you want. So you can display it the same way. So it can handle those things, but it's not really doing anything particularly special for you. It's kind of just spitting out what you put in.
I have one. How long have you been working on this?
A long time, over a decade.
Really?
Yep, it's been a long run. Kathy's come along more recently, but probably produced more code than I have in total. So yeah, it's been a long process. So while this version has been getting developed, I built a previous version that all of our clients are on that haven't moved to this system, and that's been in place for more than 20 years, I'd say.
Oh, my goodness.
But this particular version has been in the works for 10 years. So it's actually a very exciting day that we're going to be launching this thing and ultimately open sourcing it as well. So yeah, it's been a big part of my life and now Kathy's life. So
Based here in Buffalo, or?
yep, based here in Buffalo.
Cool.
Yeah, so the business is Command Solutions. It's downtown in Allentown. But there's two businesses involved, one that owns the software and one that does implementations for the clients. So, any other questions?
I could ask a whole bunch of information security questions that you probably wouldn't be able to answer. That's okay.
Maybe we can. We actually have a lot of financial firms and whatnot using our
Is that
system,
right?
so we definitely have to pay attention.
Okay, can you lock row level data? So say what I'd like to have is everybody's information accessible except their social security number.
So,
Can I, okay.
good question. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah,
Does it
well,
work?
that'll do. Let's
Okay,
start with that.
all right. So there are, so this is actually something that's really interesting. You should probably talk about this because Kathy's actually built a lot of this. But so with SQL databases, relational databases, when you do a query, you can grant authorizations, but they're not very fine-grained, which is I think what you're getting at. So we have very fine-grained authorizations, and the authorizations span not just rows, but also columns, like you're saying, like social security number. And you can define user roles that have I can't overemphasize, very fine-grained authorizations. And those authorizations aren't just at the content management layer. They're in the query layer, which is why we had to write our own sort of version of SQL, which we tried to match SQL wherever possible. But it's because it actually applies those authorizations to your queries, whether you're running them at the command line or you're running them over a web service. So if you can set it up so that you can even give an administrator access, but lock them out from seeing social security numbers, for example. And they can query and hack at the database as much as they want, but if they're not authorized to see that column, they will not see that column of data. So it does have both row and column level authorizations.
Yeah, they won't see it from a web service request if they put the query, select social security numbers from people. They won't see it there. They won't see it from the API if they make a query. They won't see it in the user interface. Because we wanted to make sure that, it's not just the interface sort of like hiding it from you at the last minute. It's actually like really built in low level.
So, and so you can create a user essentially that is the user you use to access the web service, and that can have its own restrictions. Then you can have a user that's used to log into the system that has its own restrictions. So you can have a lot of different types of users and limit them appropriately based on the security, how they're accessing the system. Like, you don't want a web service, you want a web service to be locked down if it's publicly accessible, for
And
example.
you integrate with pre-existing permissions for something like Active Directory.
We don't currently. We could eventually do a synchronization essentially, but we don't currently have anything like
Might be very useful.
that. Yes, for sure, for sure.
So how would you implement high availability? Because normally, I'm thinking because it has a, say a Postgres backend or MySQL, you would rely on the database over here, you'd set a cluster, and then you'd have a bunch of application servers behind a load balancer over here, and then, they're basically separate areas of high availability. But this sounds like it's more integrated. Does that rely exclusively on the database high availability, or how does that?
It does currently, but we actually have plans to address that at a higher level as well. So currently, it sits on top of a MySQL database. So if you do replication of that, you're covered. It's essentially doing that for you. Or if you move to Amazon Aurora, that does the replication for you. So it can sit on top of the lower level database, and that can be replicated using traditional, however, whatever kind of arrangement you want for replication. But we are building, we don't have yet, so I don't want to say we have it yet, but this concept of synchronizing folders and content, so you have those organizational structures that I was talking about. So you could say, I want to synchronize this entire folder or this entire repository of content to this other server, and it will actually happen in real time. And there's a whole bunch of questions that I'm sure you probably have as far as like consistency and everything else there. So we'll need to address those, and they're difficult challenges, but we've already thought a lot about this, and there will be different models that you can choose from to decide how it's going to replicate, depending on how you need it to replicate. If you have multiple read or read-write, there will be different options. We don't have that yet, but we have sort of the foundation to build some of that functionality.
Pipeline.
Yeah, and so that wouldn't rely on it. So you could even have, at that point, you could even have a repository that's sitting on top of Postgres over here and a repository that's sitting on top of MySQL over here, and they would stay in sync. And so that would be the replication. So it opens up some interesting possibilities, but we still have to work through that. Any other questions? Those are great questions.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Of course, it didn't give me my speaker notes. Let's see. Am I over the plus? There we go. That'll work. Should have closed all my windows before I started this.
Yes. This is what your brain is.
Hey, there we go. All right. Sorry about that. All right, so I'm going to talk to you about Recollect today. Just to give you some background, I'm the Senior Support Manager for Engineer, and my role actually demands that I wear a whole bunch of different hats. Most of the time I'm wearing my DBA hat. As of late, that's becoming less and less as I transition into other areas, but often I still find myself addressing functionality, fixing bugs in our support applications, working within our API and at the command line, and adding content to Git repos, writing shell scripts, and a lot of time spent advising customers on tools that I've never actually used myself, and I just get to tell them about them from time to time. So there's a lot of things that I touch or that I advise on that I only see every few months. And this ends up resulting in a situation where I'm rereading the same blog posts or the same sets of documentation over and over again. And so this is inefficient, costs me a lot of time. It can make for inconsistent answers. Nothing more embarrassing than giving a customer one answer and then 6 months later them asking the same question and giving them a different answer. Especially if your first answer was actually better than your second answer. So a few years ago I saw a lightning talk by Mark Joseph, and he was talking about how he addresses this. And so Mark keeps this stack of index cards nearby. So when he does look something up, he takes the time to write it down on these cards. And when you're working in a consistent problem space where you're always addressing the same thing, this works, especially if you review those cards from time to time. Eventually you don't need them, you throw the cards out. So I tried that, and I actually did it for about 4 years, and that's how many cards I got, because I could never find the cards. I could never figure out where I left the little binder and stuff like that. The biggest problem is when you're focused in on an issue, it's hard to remember to actually use these things. Then you got to find them. And if you're traveling, guess what? You left them at home. And so you're sitting there on the airplane and it's like, how do I do that thing in Postgres? Oh crap, I don't have the Postgres manual downloaded. Okay, do you pay for the airtime on the airplane or not? So, yeah. So last week I gave up on the index cards. Well, not last week, but actually back in April. Because the basic need is to simplify this interaction with my computer. So why shouldn't the index cards live in that space? And I couldn't find a tool that felt like a good fit. You know, there's sticky notes that you can put on your workspace and whatever, but it didn't feel right. So I decided to write Recollect. And Recollect is a command line utility written in Ruby, and it's Linux, Mac compatible. There's no Windows version. I don't have Windows, sorry. If anybody wants to make a Windows version, I'd be happy to see one. At its core, basically what Recollect does is it keeps track of a bunch of snippets that are important to you. And at each core, each snippet is just a text file. So you can generate, share, use Git to synchronize with members of your team. Just use it however it fits your needs best. So I stretched the truth a little bit. It's not quite everything. To be clear, it's a command line tool for remembering snippets that you don't use often. So if you find yourself outlining hugely complex procedures, you probably should be looking to see if it should be part of your organization's knowledge base instead. So interaction is designed to be straightforward and easy to recollect. You can create or edit. You can read, delete, list, search, and append. And it's also got some functionality so that if you can't quite remember what you called that thing, you can say recollect my, and it'll give you all the it'll list all the recollections for you that start with my. And if there's only one, it will suggest that one, and you can just say yes, and it'll open it for you. So to install it, it's just gem install recollect. So send me your feedback, create a fork, and I will, let's see, just show you some of my recollections here. All right, so I got a bunch of stuff in there, and if I do, and of course it's way off the screen, which is not helpful. So I just said recollect post, and it said, did you mean Postgres? And I said, yes. So that's basically it.
I have about 15 copies of that query sprinkled in different text documents.
It's very handy because you just copy, paste, done. If I want to add something, I can just recollect a pen and just type it right there on the command line and hit enter.
You can write up all the user documentation for this in itself.
So that's making little text files when you do a recollect entry, that's making a little text file on your machine?
Yep.
Using grep to find them? Is that how it do to suggest Postgres?
I don't even remember what I used. I think I used Ruby Search because I did want to keep it as agnostic as possible. There are some specific areas where it wouldn't be compatible with Microsoft that solutions would have to be found to, but it wouldn't be hard. Obviously, it's dropping the text off, but it supports so you can do file paths. You can nest things at deeper levels. So I don't remember what's inside the process, but
How do you do that when you add a new recollection to put it in a subdirectory?
Just like you would if it was a file system.
Cool.
And then when you say recollect new, it opens your favorite text editor.
Does it start with a V?
Somebody starts with a T.
It's almost entirely illegible.
Your text editor really set to be blue on black.
It shows up much better when it's not on a...
Yeah,
Not on the big
not on a
screen.
shitty
Does that mean you have a
display.
good vision plan?
Oh, look at that.
No.
Yeah.
So when you do the search, like when you said my, is it looking at just the file names, or is it actually looking in the content of the text files itself?
If I remember correctly, it's just looking at the file names. Let me try and find...
Yeah, do a search for itch. Maybe it'll find Mitch's file.
Yeah, no, it didn't find an itch. So that's actually a good idea. Okay. New functionality.
Accepting pull requests.
Yes, accepting pull requests. Absolutely.
I find that I'm in dire need of like a personal wiki. Essentially, I like the kind of Wikipedia interface, like through a browser and like the hierarchy that it lets you have. And I feel like it would be awesome though to have this command line, if it were somehow in the browser and able to be used as a wiki, but then also quick command line access through like, you know, on the phone with a client, you type in with one hand or something. It'd be really nice to like have it kind of be both ways if you're in a command line environment versus through a browser.
Yeah, it did occur to me to actually write it as like a markdown enabled thing, but then I was like, no, I think I'll just stick with text. But
Baby steps.
could be.
Baby steps.
I know a lot of people hated SharePoint when that was a thing.
That could be added. It wouldn't be hard.
I use that a ton for notes.
As we used to say in the 9th Infantry Division, one panic at a time.
And then you can port it to Alexa, or whatever the hell we're gonna call it in the future.
Big brother. It's on your desk, it's little brother.
All
This is
right.
really cool.
Oh, one more question.
Yeah.
Can we get that?
Yeah.
I missed if you said it was.
Just gem install recollect if you have Ruby already.
You did, okay, yep.
And it's in open source Git repo as well, GitHub repo.
Okay, cool.
All right, so looks like we've got Teja up next. Did I say your name right?
Yeah. Can I borrow it from you?
Oh, yeah. Let's see here. Let me minimize a whole bunch of stuff for you.
Oh my God. This is.
What do you need?
I think I borrowed it.
Oh, okay.
So, we're using this. interface. Will not fit.
May I ask who PJ is? Are you wanting to actually go last? Because I was going to put my name out.
No, you can put, yeah, That was just the first open spot. so
Oh,
that's-
okay, all right, I didn't know if it was VSC Lab to be last.
Okay. I don't know why Microsoft is trying to auto-update that. Let's see. Do you need you probably need the screens mirrored, right?
Sorry?
Do you need the screens mirrored?
I'm using the, I download one small video and then.
So yeah, it was interesting.
Do you need a web connection?
Yeah,
I
right.
don't know if I'm logged on to this network.
Sure. 3 people in there, like James Turner from support. Dan Wu.
Yeah, who's still on there?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. He's engineering for me. He means well. I think Sean does too. I think they're just, you know, I met the new CEO. They didn't do that well. He was like, I'm drinking 19 and scotch. And I said, no, I don't really give a shit what you're drinking right now. This is a team event. You're singing karaoke, and you're doing it.
Now, this wasn't the part that I left on Microsoft. So,
This is, yeah, no, that was Deus.
How did he take that? Because I wonder how somebody like
Oh, it
him-
went really well.
Yeah?
Yeah. I said, now you're part of the team. Now we can talk about business. He said, I wondered why they ever laid you off. Yeah, I can't even imagine.
Sorry.
Damon had used up all the curse words for
He's doing well. Saw him a couple, well, about a month and a half ago.
Okay. Let's do this another way.
Yeah, we went to a party with Rosario in Dawson, and the guys who
I'm
was
trying mine.
It was.
going to executive producers on Mr. Robot. He's not an executive, he's an advisor.
Boy, the fun never stops here, does it?
Tether.
Dude, it's amazing talking. I like you. You want to do what it takes. It's like, thanks, guys. Listen, party like this, party friend. So, Eamon has taken me to so many ridiculous parties that I never should have been at. So just like, hey, you remember when very awesome? He goes, the movie stuff? Yeah. He goes, yeah, I never should have. You want to go out partying with me? And this dude, and he's like, fuck yeah.
No, the only time I see, well, you're ready for
Getting clean.
is,
Snowboarding on Instagram?
yeah, snowboarding or another angel investor for some other company that has $1 million. Now he's just moved down and,
I'm relatively sure David's not 30 yet.
yeah, I just, yes. I don't know what it is he does.
He sold his first startup when he was 14 years old. It's not even an exaggeration.
There we go.
Like, he just sold his third startup. And I know that they each got, I think it was 3 million. Eamon and David
Oh,
got 3
that you
million
mentioned.
each. And they sold their- and then he sold, was it Barrier? Barricade.
Okay.
That's what it's called.
Yeah.
To Sophos for 15. And everybody at the company got a nice payout from that. He was like, cool, I'm gonna go snowboarding.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I talked to Jeff Lake about it, because Jeff is, he's on.
See if you can get a URL to come up there. Your URL.
He cracks me up.
Oh, you gotta use Gmail? Oh, it's still doing it. Does anybody actually have a connection here?
No problem. Yeah, we start with mine. If there's no need for.
I don't have any. Mine was working.
It's not my fault.
I do, but.
It's not an iPhone.
I might, yeah. I plugged in, but it might time me out, so I guess.
No problem. I just start with this. With my mobile. That's fine.
Yeah, do you want to use this, or?
I just want to use it.
That's fine.
Do you want to
Yeah.
email it to me, or I'll log out of Gmail, and you can
I want to
log
log
in
in
if
the
you
gym.
want?
That's fine.
I will never forget that.
That makes
Now,
me out
now
and
it's
log
logged
in.
in.
Maybe that corner's a dead air spot.
You do it to fuck with you, you know that, right?
Yep.
Okay, go ahead and sign in.
I thought apples were supposed to be easy to use.
This one's got some,
It's seen better days.
Oh, you got rid of
How
the
long-
17-inch piece.
yes.
How long have you had that though?
That one? Gotta be about 4 years old now. Maybe 3.
This one you're gonna rip on.
Well, that's forever, don't they?
They do now.
Yeah.
They didn't used to, but they do now.
Data summit.
Oliver, we can edit that part out.
Yeah, sorry for the delay. I'm just going to speak on statistical perspectives of data quality issues in real applications. So we have been seeing a lot of new softwares coming in this market regarding data wrangling and data pre-processing. So the main issue what I'm going to focus is on statistical perspectives or something which is concerned with machine learning. And please note that this talk is not going to consist of anything related to databases, and it's going to be pretty boring because it involves a bit of math. So the first thing what we have in the data quality issues is missing data. Outliers, noisy data, data mismatch, and curse of dimensionality. The missing data and data outliers are something which I'm going to focus today, and these things are related to data pre-processing. So now, a lot of us over here are going to tackle this with the help of, this is something which we have the issue with missing data on regression. So when you see you have a lot of data, you can fit it using regression in a very perfect way, but if you don't have a data, you cannot choose a proper function, approximation method for a regression technique. So the lack of data is going to affect your classifier in such a way that you don't get correct output. So this is going to give you very wrong insights, and whatever you're going to make out of your data is going to be wrong. So this is one of the major reasons if we have some data which we consider as critical missing. So that is one of the issue. And the second issue is outliers or missing data on PCA. A lot of data what we collect or what we have in our databases or residing are not perfectly aligned with the correct data. There are many outliers, and sometimes whatever the data we enter, it is something which is different from what we think, and it is something different from what its true form is. So that is what is an outlier. So now, these are the mechanisms of missing data. Missing completely at random. It is something that when you have a data in your database and it does, it is going to be missing if you observe, if you see in the observed and unobserved data, it is completely missing. That is, if you have a training set and a validation set in a data, in a machine learning problem, the data will be missing even in the validation set as well as in the training set. So these two, if they're missing, it's not a problem. But it is, if the data is missing only in the training set, then it's called as missing at random. And data is not missing at random. That is, if your data is missing in the training set, but if your data is present in the validation set, then you're at a problem, because the error what you're going to get on the training set will not be compatible with the error what you're getting in the testing set. So this is going to give you a very bad results, and it is going to impact your analysis on the data. So these are the three probabilistic analysis on how the data is missing and what steps you need to take in order to mitigate that effect. So the first effect is mean imputation. A lot of us who have been doing analysis, we input the values of mean or median or mode using data wrangling packages like Trifecta or Python analysis to do to cover the missing data values. So this is nothing but mean imputation. Whatever you do is you take the mean of the values where the data is missing, and then you substitute the mean in the places where the data is missing. So that is nothing but you're substituting the values. What are the advantages? If your data is missing in both the training set and validation set, then it works very well and you can use this. And what is other advantage? It is convenient to implement. You just need to take the mean of data or the median of data and see which is working well on the classifier or on the regression analysis, and you're going to use it and derive your results. But what is a major disadvantage? It is nothing but bias, or the variance of the data set is going to be skewed. Any one of you have worked on machine learning before, or observed any analysis or did any confusion matrix analysis on the data? Let me be more precise on this. So what we do is, before we analyze the model or analyze the data, what we see is how each variable or how each feature is dependent on one another. Based on that, we are going to choose our own machine learning algorithm, and then we are going to run the algorithm on the data, and then we are going to do it. But if you have a bias in your database, it is going to skew your results. And this is something which I am saying about confusion matrix. So one data is related to, one variable is related to other. So let's take an example to say that in the Thanksgiving sales, there are a lot of discounts offered and our sales will be higher at that point of time. So we know that if there is any Thanksgiving sale, the data will be high. But the bias will be working in such a way that on every sale, it is going to consider it as Thanksgiving sale and it is going to skew your results. So that is how it's going to impact. Next is outlier. Observation which deviates so much from other observation as to arouse suspicion, it was generated by different mechanism. So for example, say a girl was pregnant with a boy, okay, but the doctor says she's not pregnant. And a man who has a heavy stomach, the doctor says he is pregnant. Can a man get pregnant? So this is something considered as an outlier. So you predict something which is unnatural and something which is not going to happen as correct prediction. So these kind of things happen when we are crowdsourcing the data. Crowdsourcing is nothing but when you have a data analyst who is going to enter the data for you, there will be a lot of outliers. Say for example, my name is pronounced as Teja here in India, Teja in some other part, and in again Spanish accent it is going to be different. So mostly in NLP based system, that is language based system, you are going to get a lot of outliers because of dialect differences or pronunciation differences. So this is one thing which is going to impact our system. So let us see how we can mitigate these outliers. Three of the basic methods are statistical analysis, proximity based, clustering based. The statistical analysis is something related to supervised learning. So supervised learning is where you have the label as well as where you have the examples. Based on that, you're going to detect it. Semi-supervised is proximity based and unsupervised is clustering based. So you have these two kind of outliers. One is universal versus contextual. So this is something, your cluster, and these two are your contextual outliers, and this is something your universal outlier. This is something your singular outlier, and this is something this is a collective outlier, and this is something your singular outlier. So outliers are two different types, and these form the major undergrounds or underpinnings to do your analysis on data wrangling. So let us see what are the statistical methods which give more basis for doing this analysis. So we have a data generation technique where we use a lot of probabilistic methods like normal distribution, Gaussian distribution to generate the data synthetically. So one of the paper which has been recently published talks about how to generate data synthetically using GANs or generative adversarial neural networks. And it says that we have to assume that the data has been generated synthetically and we have to adhere that it is going to be of that type only. So if you see that data has been belonging to this part, you're going to throw it away, and if data is of this part, you're going to throw it away. So you're only going to consider the data which is in this region. Classification method is nothing but you take a classifier that is logistic regression based or tree based methods and consider this as which is something good data, and this is a this as something an outlier. And next is proximity based. Nothing but you take the distances between each points, you project the points into a space of 3D dimensions or 2D dimensions, and then you're going to take the distance between them, and wherever the distance is more than some particular value, you're going to discard all the data sets which are more heavier than them. So main takeaways you need to do is you need to explore your data well, identify appropriate techniques so that you can mitigate some issues, know what you need to know, you should know more about the data, and also you need to know the biases which are going to be staying with the person who is collecting the data when you're crowdsourcing the data. Now this is something which I used at my work when I was working over there. This is a system which has been developed by Stanford University, and the professor has been particularly working on databases. What we do generally is, when we get the data, we have labels with us. That is, we call it a supervised machine learning. In this Snorkel system, we generally write scripts so that they generate the labels for the data. So this is majorly used if you want to, perform your machine learning on your database yourself without any other considerations. The next one is AutoML. Until now, what we have seen is, we have been database side. What we are doing is we have been performing data wrangling or data pre-processing, but we are not generating but we are not doing any machine learning level analysis. But what if we can automate the whole process as a whole? The data pre-processing as well as the data wrangling and machine learning together can be tied at one end, and you can do it totally on a database. That is, for example, if you are using a Postgre or a Oracle database, all the data after your ETL, if you want to do an analysis, say that there are three kinds of data analysis. One is classification, the other is regression, and the third one is clustering. So if you want to do a classification analysis on your database itself without help of any data scientist or without help of any data analyst, no need of data pre-processing, no need of data cleaning, everything is going to be taken care by a software which is going to do on whole what you need to do and how you need to design a system. So this is the concept of automated machine learning. It's still in its stages of nascent stages. It is not yet evolved, but once you get this system, you can do the whole analysis without any data scientist or data wrangling techniques. I have been working on this one, and we just unsuccessfully tried to do a small problem wherein we tuned the hyperparameters with human supervision, and we just did it, but it was not successful. But I'm hoping that this will culminate into a future successful project which reduces the amount of dependence on human intervention, and our databases can be more intelligent in future. And recently there has been a paper in SIGMOD conference where deep learning meets databases, where it touches on the aspects of how databases can be used for deep learning projects. So deep learning is nothing but your neural networks, what you use, and how the databases can be fine-tuned to hold a large amount of data for analysis part. So that is something for AutoML and databases. So next part, I'm hopefully trying to, in next coming months, hopefully trying to integrate the ETL process, the machine learning process and the data pre-processing process, but it's still under consideration. I'm not so sure how this goes on, but I'll be able to see the light of the day one day. Any doubts?
No doubts, I have a question.
Questions?
Yeah.
Go.
It's called questions.
Okay. So, yeah, I have a question. So, when you're talking about missing data, are you able to, through these patterns and different techniques, are you able to identify where data is missing at, I guess, I'm trying to find a distinction between a specific type of a data point, right? Let's say field and database, that seems like it's not correct. Or are you looking at, there's sets of data that could be related? So, for example,
we both look at the same. We look at the two aspects. One is in the databases. We look at the rows which are null, as well as we do feature engineering in machine learning, where we take particular column, we call it as a feature, and using that particular column, we are going to feed it into the classifier or in the regression based analysis machine, and we are going to do there. So we are going to see how each column or each row is behaving. So you take row as a feature, okay, when row as a data set, and column we define it as a feature. Whenever you take columns, you call it as feature engineering, and whenever you take rows, it's called data engineering. In the machine learning technique. Data engineering again is in the database terminology. Data engineering is how you set up the data pipeline from an end to end to distribute data across yourself. But from the machine learning perspective, you just see how many examples you have got, or how many how much amount of count in the table, and based on that you will do it. So you're going to look at two sides of the data. That is at the column perspective as well as at the row perspective.
Sorry. So kind of tying both of your, like the question and the answer, what I kind of caught from this presentation is, let's say we have a attribute in a, and correct me if I'm wrong, I can be totally off on this. If there is an attribute for my heart rate on my, Oliver uses this example quite a lot. This is my Fitbit, it records my continuous heart rate, and when I take it off, there will be missing values in a chronological order stream of heart rates. Doesn't mean I'm dead, it's just that I've taken it off. So,
It could, but doesn't necessarily mean you did.
doesn't necessarily mean. So, perhaps when you're trying to fill in missing values for such an attribute, you would not fit an exponential function or some parabolic. You know its heart rate, it would be in a certain range, maybe approximated by a linear function. So once you have that function fitted, you can approximate, okay, here are the missing values. It might be that I can guess those values using the line, but this is like a domain expertise being applied to that particular attribute, and you know its heart rate. That's why you're doing this. So perhaps, I mean, numerical techniques as well as your domain knowledge comes in.
Yes,
Something
domain
like
knowledge
that.
plays a lot of
Right.
important role over here.
So you might take it off because you're going to sleep and your heart rate goes entirely different levels when you're asleep. So
Mhm.
your domain knowledge would tell you that, you know, what is the context by which you have the lack of data. I get you.
This was actually like more than half of the presentations at CSE Demo Days last week were about trying to put back data that was missing because it was null or crazy. And it just, there's something deep in my core that says, never do that. You know, just forget about the nulls, just scrape that out and work. But there was a couple of times where they were making the case for why you would need to put data back in, and it didn't commit to memory, so I must have not liked their answers. Like they were talking about things where you've got machines with sensors, and it's easy to tell when a sensor gives you bad data because it can't be past 0 and 2 centimeters. It just can't. But there is the bad reading. But why is it important enough to have, you know, have those nulls filled in?
Actually, yeah. See, the reason why we want nulls filled in is because, you know, you have a very less amount of features. For example, now I'm coming to again features. Features are nothing but your columns, and you want to predict something which is valuable for you. For example, say UFO sighting. You have UFO sighting. You don't have any evidence that there is any UFO vehicle or anything. What we generally do is whatever the images we captured, we are just going to fill with it, and we are going to see and validate if it is correct or not. Similarly, if you don't have values over there, you are going to completely remove the column, or you are going to completely remove the row for that. So what we want to do is we want to perform a better analysis, we want to generalize more in a better way. So in order to get a less amount of error, we are going to mix it with a mean or a median, and we are going to see that the error is coming down. That is nothing but, in terminology of machine learning, we call it as test error, and it is coming down, and then we are going to present the insights. So in order to give better generalization, and in order to give more examples to your machine and machine learning classifier, and if you are using deep learning, you require around of 3 million records or 3 million images for, you know, the machine learning algo to work well. So in such kind of places where you don't have enough amount of information, we do use these kind of methods. But where you have a heavy amount of information, what we do is we leave it as null. We are just going to deprecate the column or the row, and based on the values, we are going to generate the analysis. So it all depends on the examples you have. Yes.
Is this helping you out at all when you're doing, let's say, a
Sorry?
design of experiments?
Sorry,
If you're doing a design of experiments, is this approach helping you out?
This kind of approach will help me out in my design of experiment. Yes.
How so?
One area where I worked a lot was, in the cases on sentiment analysis. Okay. Over there, you cannot properly say how what is the intention of the person, okay, or what he is going to say. So generate, what we do is, we have sentences which are very positive or very negative, but we don't have sentences which are both having positive and negative. Using these techniques, what we did was we generated synthetically few sentences which had both positive as well as negative, and segregated the sentences which are negative and segregated sentences which are positive. So these kind of techniques, what I told you were right. They are generally used in situations where you don't have data in a perfect format. These are the statistical underpinnings, and we have been doing, these techniques. We have been doing manually using Python or R. One software what we generally use in our daily life is Trifecta. Okay, it came out of Stanford. That does this kind of techniques using these statistical techniques. What I thought was, to tell you more mathematics behind it, so that you can use the better technique in tomorrow when you are encountering such kind of situations. But as a database engineer, I'm not going to use any of these techniques. But as a data scientist, I'm going to use this.
But it looks like you're trying to reduce the variation.
Yeah, I'm trying to reduce the variation in the data. I'm just trying to see if I can generate data which is going to be practical and which is going to be more, looking more correct when I'm doing these kind of techniques.
So, like, just to make a metaphor of this, like if your machine is learning and you've got some really crazy outliers in the data, it's sort of like your intelligence system at the end is going to look for zebras when it should be thinking horses because it heard hoofs, right?
Yes, exactly.
So you're trying to get it to never look for zebras.
Yes, never look for zebras. I can tell you one example. Recently in 2014, University of Montreal has released one paper that is generative adversarial networks. Okay, what it does was you have a discriminator and you have a generator. The generator is going to generate images and discriminator is going to see if we can counter those examples as wrong. For example, the example you said was horse will look something, have a mane and it's going to have some shape, and zebra is going to have all white and black colors on it. So if I am synthesizing an image which consists of zebra's body and a horse head, the machine learning classifier has to understand that it's a wrong image and it has to classify it as a wrong image. So for that kind of data synthesis, you use this kind of, these are very little say there, but you use very high amount of mathematics for those. One area where you can see is, there is adversarial training which is being now used for seeing how the roles of databases, how they are going to misuse and everything. There is one small experiment going on. You can just see that. It's not fully there, but you can just see the Clever Hands blog, which has one mention of those things. Those techniques can be incorporated to security violations and other things.
Thank you. All right, guys, so it's getting towards the later side, so we do need to try and let these presentations move along a little bit quicker. The topics and the questions are great, so I don't want to shortchange anybody, but I want everybody signed up to have an opportunity. So, it looks like, is it Jesus?
Yep.
Is next.
Yep, can you pause the recording?
Ready to time. I do this for a living.
Time is an illusion caused by the mass of history.
That's right.
Yeah, last time we took an over-under on him, we lost because he nailed it.
Whoa.
Coding in the Mozart effect.
Okay, the timer's
Not
starting now.
saying I wasn't
Boy, that's small.
coded 4K.
Wow.
but
Holy
it
shit.
may happen, I'm sorry.
This is wicked impressive. This is a test to see if my vision plan works. Yep, and everything.
Carrots will be distributed for
You could use the Zoom app on your smartphone, right?
Does anyone see a mouse?
You're almost there, but you can't see it once it goes onto the control window.
See what happens if I hit play.
Hey, all right,
Perfect.
that works.
All right, so this is going to be a much softer talk than all the other ones. So my name is PJ. I work at a place called DevRelate.io. If you want to talk about that, it's pretty cool. I opened it like 3 months ago. So what is music? So this is just one part of the definition of music, and it was laid out by this guy called Don Campbell, who wrote this book called The Mozart Effect. And it was pretty cool. Don wanted to see if there were ways to get Alzheimer's patients into a better place mentally, if they could retain information and see if they could keep it for longer periods of time. Which is cool, because Don thought that like this was going to be the greatest homeopathic breakthrough in the history of everything. And so Don said, I'm going to sit down with a bunch of patients, and of course I'm going to play them Mozart, because who doesn't want to like listen to Mozart? It's the most beautiful music ever written. Real quick, Don really thought that he was literally going to reverse the effects of Alzheimer's. He wasn't looking for like just a cognitive boost. He thought people were actually going to reverse and become better and remember things. Like if you saw The Notebook, whoever saw The Notebook, I'm sorry. So like he really thought that he was doing this amazing thing and he was going to be like this guru and shit. It was going to be the most amazing thing that ever came out. But he actually found things that were really cool. If you are into homeopathic medicine, I'm sorry, I'm probably going to make fun of it. But Don did base his research on science, and he did a lot of tests. So he worked with a doctor called F.H. Rauscher, and they looked at things. They started with mice, and then chimps, and then humans to see if they could do things with better spatial reasoning and better functioning when listening to Mozart. And what they found was, and this is the interesting part, humans have a mean spatial IQ boost of 8 to 10 points higher after listening to specific pieces by Mozart. I meant to put it in my notes what the piece was. I don't recall what it is,
Oh shit,
but I
I
will find
need that
out.
piece.
We're getting it, Al. Bear with me. So what exactly is it? So the idea is it's a set of research results that indicate that listening specifically to Mozart's music may induce short-term improvement on the performance of certain kinds of mental tasks known as spatial temporal reasoning. Some things that fall into spatial temporal reasoning are things like building databases and writing code. So that's why this is kind of pertinent. So in plain English, your brain works better when you're listening to music. Here it is. It was on a different thing. Mozart's Sonata for 2 pianos, K448, for the first 10 minutes. That's what they used for their testing. So that was really cool. And all this was really looking at how different sounds affected the brain. They did see some improvement in the Alzheimer's patients, which was awesome. But it was a little misleading because it would only last for a little while, and they couldn't figure out why after like an hour or two that whole effect would wear out. But the basis behind this in coding is basically math, music is basically math, that's why these things work. It's spatial reasoning. But obviously they weren't thinking of like really ultra cool hip coders that are slinging code in Silicon Valley and looking awesome like this guy. Mathematicians, scientists, developers, systems administrators, none of these people were even close. They wanted to worry about Alzheimer's. They wanted to worry about Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS, and all of these other mentally debilitating diseases. They were looking for a cure, and they wanted the cure specifically to be music. And it worked really well. But there's just this one little flaw in their plan.
Doesn't work.
So a few years ago, some researchers at Harvard and Oxford were like, seems a little fishy, like why did this specifically work? And the thing was, it wasn't specifically that it was Mozart. It's named the Mozart effect because that's what they used. However, it's totally logical that it could be the Bieber effect. Because it's really relational to the person, what their background is. It's about what's in the music. And actually, that's not true. Bieber's music is absolute crap. It doesn't help anyone do anything. So it's not so much what's in the music itself, it's what's in our brains. We all grew up in different cultures, different households. I remember when I was young, I used to get up, my mom would have Danny Nevereth playing oldies in the morning. And so it was the Beatles and the Who and all that stuff when I was really super young. And that was the music I grew up to. That's the music I also went to school with. That was the first thing I heard. I got up, I'm feeling good, I ate my Cheerios, got on the bus, went to school, and I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna bust some math this morning. Because that's what I'm used to. And it works kind of like those brain games, Lumosity, and when you play Sudoku on your phone before you go to bed. These are all things that give you a cognitive boost. So where does it come into coding? So being a coder, being a DBA, being someone who writes things that are technical and difficult, we talk about the tools that we have. It's like, oh, I have a great MacBook Pro, and I have a sweet keyboard that's mechanical. I put it together myself, and it has pink and black keys. It's fucking awesome. That's all great. You have one tool, and that's your brain. So you want that tool to obviously perform at the basic, best that it can. You work at a base level, so changing things up in your environment or listening to different kinds of music will actually help you do that. The only problem is, again, it's ephemeral. It's temporary. It's not going to be there forever, so we have to keep that in mind. Just pouring more and more longer playlists and building Spotify playlists with 90 songs so you have something for 12-hour days doesn't make it better.
It's about finding the right music, though. That's the first step. You have to have something that you understand, something that's related to you, something that you're easy to use. Now, so what does this mean? Everybody has different kinds of music that influence them. I mentioned that before. For me, I was big into punk rock, hardcore, and then the oldies and stuff like that. And the first thing I looked at when I was doing my studies, because I did this when I was in college, was instrumental music. So I said, all right, well, cool. What instrumental music do I like? I like a lot of different things. I'm a drummer, so let's look at what the most basic thing a drummer is going to listen to if they're learning how to play the drums. It's jazz. So I started listening to a lot of Charlie Parker while I was studying, while I was doing my work, and holy crap, my grades went through the roof. They were pretty good already, but I'm just saying. But what if that's not your thing? What if you like hardcore and metal, which a lot of people in Buffalo do? I don't know why, but it's true. You want instrumental metal, you look at a band like Caspian. Caspian is a metal band out of I think Sweden or somewhere, where there's no words, there's never any words, but you get all the nice solos and all the beautiful stuff, and you love it. So there's different things. And what do you do once you kind of reach your point of you're not really getting into this anymore? Well, you find another boat. You use what floats your boat, you try another boat, you look at something different. I like to use a quote from my brother here. My brother is a former hip-hop artist. He played shows in Buffalo for years, loved it. Rapped all over the place, thought it was great. And he sat me down one time, we were at Thanksgiving dinner or something, he goes, the thing is, everybody has something in every genre of music that they like. And I was like, I hate country music, that can't possibly be true. He goes, oh yeah? Kenny Rogers, The Gambler. And I was like, oh, you son of a bitch. You're right, that's a great song. And that's the key. Bruce Springsteen said it best, we should embrace everything that sounds right to our ears. Which brings up another thing. So we're listening to this music while we're working. And the fact is, you can actually do a lot of damage. So one thing that I will say is kind of the caveat to all of this is don't use earbuds. Use nice over-the-ear headphones. Don't use Beats. They have too much bass in them. They will destroy your hearing. It's really bad for you. Use something that's comfortable. Use something that has good mid-range tones because you're going to be listening for an extended amount of time. That slide's not supposed to be there. Finding music by collaborating with other people. This is something that Tyler and I used to do all the time when we worked at Engine Yard. We had everybody jump into one of these DJ rooms and it would just rotate through the DJs. People would play different music. You'd hear different things. Someone also created musicforprogramming.com, which is pretty awesome. The RIAA doesn't want me to say this, but you should share music as much as possible. Make mixtapes for your friends. Learn more about music. Find what really makes your brain start to kick in, and you will start working better and feeling better. And that's all I got. Thanks.
I misplug DJ.
It's still around.
Is it?
Oh yeah.
I thought they got squashed.
No, turntable got squashed.
Oh, okay.
Turntable was dead.
I just hate when 3 laptops in the office would all be playing it at the same time,
But even just a slight second off.
Yeah.
Yeah, my biggest issue with Pandora is I've listened to it for so long that I can sing along with all the songs, so it actually becomes a distraction.
Did you say earbuds are bad for all pieces or just for music?
Earbuds are great for phone calls, but extended
There
use
is
of
the
earbuds is
UV
really
guest
bad.
Wi-Fi.
Okay, I think it should be.
So I don't know if you caught out. I have a little bit of an attention issue.
Okay.
Podcasts for me, if they're longer than 30 minutes, I don't want to listen to it anyway. It's usually not bad to listen to a podcast through earbuds as long as it's a well-recorded, produced podcast.
But if you're trying to think and work, podcast is not.
podcast is just distracting.
My big question is, has anyone done any research on where the music is being processed in the brain?
Yes, that was part of the
stop that.
I actually have resources that I can send out. That are the longer form of the
because the rough one is that musicians process music in the language center of the brain, and everyone else is not a musician processes it in the pleasure centers of the brain, right side of the brain,
Exactly.
creative center. So I was wondering, do mathematicians do the same thing?
They do, and that's part of the reason why Mozart's used, because Mozart's, especially that piece, is extremely fractal. Like it follows the Fibonacci sequence, and that's why it's considered a pinnacle of music.
What is it again? What's that piece?
You have the slide.
Post it in the group.
Oh, yeah.
I will. I'll actually post the full talk slides in the group. So
He said he's gotta go to the bathroom.
I go to the bathroom, Chris.
Don't explode into a fine yellow mist.
No, that would be terrible.
This is a needed, yes.
Yeah. Does anybody have a UB guest account?
I could log you in with mine.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Mine wasn't working, I couldn't remember my credentials.
It didn't even occur to me, like, because we had internet with the other things.
Yeah.
You know, so it's total brain fade.
Yep.
You're using it for something else, that's all. That's why your brain's not.
I got metal in the brain now.
Doesn't-
It was metal music.
So,
Is it in?
Here's what?
I've never logged in using it.
Oh, you don't know if it's, well, I guess I can try.
You are logged into the network.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Yay! All right.
Are you connected?
Oh, I have to get connected, well, I'm not sure, and I still have this captain in here, I'm not sure.
HDMI, right?
Yeah. Where's, yeah, I never, I'm still trying to get out of this.
so everything's got to be on the opposite side, right? That's what I'm saying. Hold on, Trey.
Let me see.
May have to be told to add the additional screen.
Oh, the F8 gives you the extra screens?
Let me see.
It's a Chromebook, right?
Yeah, it doesn't have,
Oh,
maybe it's this thing here.
Yeah, it could be.
No, there's Windows.
Anybody ever presented with a Chromebook before?
I'm not gonna admit to it. 'Cause I can't remember, there's a.
Is there a displays menu?
Yeah, I forget what it is, there's a thing that shows you all the hotkeys, like there's some
Okay.
button sequence that shows you all the hotkeys for a Chromebook, and,
Maybe it's under
but I think there's a
settings.
function button up there to switch screens. Did you look in the menu, like the bottom,
Oh, the bottom left?
yeah, the bottom left corner, there's that menu, and I think it's got
Oh, maybe.
display options on there somewhere.
Yeah, I'm looking through the apps on here and seeing if something looks promising and I'm not seeing it. Oh, wait. Hold on.
Settings, device, and click displays.
Settings. Oh, and the settings icon. Oh, hold on. Device.
well, they want to sell you one, Tyler, it's not the same thing.
How much are they? Try display. Try searching.
That doesn't make sense. Those are something else.
Oh, here we go. Displays.
I think they're like, you can get them as low as like 150, 200 bucks.
They were structured as a high price.
All right. You know what? I'll do this. I can sort of semi-prepared for this. So what I was going to talk about was, I think, is one of the biggest, in my opinion, one of the biggest, my name is Rick Cecil, by the way, biggest advancements and booms to our to coding and programming since GitHub came out, I believe. And it's notebooks. And for those who haven't, have any of you tried Python notebooks or R? Okay, so essentially it's doing code right in the browser, and it's good code. It's Python, or R. It's technically it started out as IPython, which is an IDE for Python, and it now supports. It's called Jupyter.
Jupyter,
Yeah. So it supports, as I mentioned, in addition to Python and R, which are data science, and Python's pretty general purpose. R is more statistical oriented, but they both are really good at working with data science, and have libraries for all this stuff, including machine learning and such. And then there's Julia, which I personally haven't worked with, but I understand that that's along those lines as well. And it's cool stuff because rather than having to go through the process of building an environment, downloading Anaconda for Windows, or trying to use, even though Docker makes these things easy on as we have seen from prior meetups or experience, it makes it easier. It doesn't really necessarily work that way with Windows. You don't always want to have to go through that trouble. And imagine, if you haven't done so already, you go to a place like Kaggle, I'm not sure how you pronounce it because I used it for a bunch of months and thought it's spelled Kaggle. You can look look it up on your phone or whatever. It started out as a portal for data science competitions, but I was looking for some open data for a project at one point, just for doing stuff with Python, and my web search pointed me to Kaggle, and I stumbled upon this and started playing around. In addition to the open data sets, it has the Jupyter notebook, or Jupyter notebook built right in. It's basically an implementation of it. It's got the same interface, but it's really easy to create an account. It's free. You have access to all of Kaggle's data sets and all the libraries you need. You don't have to download anything or install it. It's all in the browser. And batteries are included, and then some, as they say about Python, but more so. And it's really cool stuff. If you like visualizations with data, where anything from a bar chart to interactive maps where you plot GPS data or what have you, or do mashups of census data, you can do all that. They have a lot of data right there on Kaggle, or you can upload your own, create your own data sets. Very easy. Everything's just point, click, upload. You're done. It's just amazing stuff. So if you have any kind of interest at all in coding, and I imagine a bunch of you probably do, even if it's something that's like, well, you maybe did a little bit of coding, dabbled in it, but not, you kind of put off by the whole installing the stuff and setting up libraries and this and that. This is a really easy way to get into this kind of stuff, and you're into the cutting edge, I believe, in terms of what's kind of hot today, which is data science, machine learning, that kind of stuff. You can just get right to that right in the browser. Super easy. And I highly recommend taking a look at it. You don't have to, and to work with notebooks, you don't have to use Kaggle. You can also use, I did a little bit, but not too much. I've used Jupyter Lab, which is a similar concept. And another thing you can do is you can set up the whole thing on your machine as well. You could actually run Jupyter locally on your own box if you had some reason to do so. It's completely open source, naturally, and so I just wanted to throw that out there in case you haven't had a chance to look at it. It's pretty cool stuff. So, any questions about it?
Is it KAGEL.org?
It's I'll write it down. It's .com.
Okay.
Yeah, Kaggle.com or Kaggle. So.
Oh, double G.
Double G.
Oh.
Yeah.
Because I was getting shot to an .org with a login screen.
And I think it's Jupyter Lab. Just do a search for Jupyter Lab in Google and it'll come right up. I don't know if it's .com or .org.
And they're running with the snake oil certificate or something, because it's giving me the advanced safety warning, proceed to Kaggle.com.
That's weird.
Really?
I think that's.
I got a typo.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna say, I didn't, it's totally legit. No, I'm serious, it really is.
Well, you can be legit and still have that message, but I had the L before the E.
What might also interest you to kind of come across is Google acquired Kaggle a few months ago.
Damn it.
Really?
Now the evil empire's got it.
Man, and I've been running, I'm on the run from Google constantly. Jeez.
So are you saying this is
That's
like,
Disney.
this is like something that JavaScript wishes it was? You've got coding going on in the browser?
You know what, that's an interesting question. I think so, in the sense of having access to something like Python, right? Being able to do things with data. I mean, you do have, with JavaScript, you have Node.js, and if you want to build, but there you have to stand up a Node's environment and NPM and all that stuff, right, to get that going. And I wouldn't want to do that, with something like Kaggle or Jupyter Lab. I wouldn't feel a need to do that, because if I want to do some data exploration, I'll give you an example. Exploratory data analysis, or EDA as it's known. Let's say what I was going to show you, if I could have gotten the display working, is I had pulled down some U.S. Census data with incomes by state, median incomes. And then I went to, this is when the Senate and the House were going through the hashing out the tax plan stuff for the tax bill. And you can go to, I forgot where I pulled it from. It was open data. It was NPR, I think. I pulled out all the different tax rates and brackets and incomes. And what I did, and this is all in Kaggle, then I found a map visualization through Matplotlib, which is built in to Kaggle as well. And I mashed up all these things together and basically created a map of the U.S. with different colors for states that keyed the median income, based on the median income, what they would gain or lose from the new tax plan. And I did for homeowners and I did for non-homeowners, this with the same. And I was going to do a whole bunch of different income levels, because you can do that. You can just tweak numbers, and you can fork it just like you do in GitHub. Let's say you have a set of data and you've done all this work. And just to give you a little more sense of how it works, you have cells. So you open up the notebook, and the first cell is just going to be loading your libraries that you're interested in, like NumPy or Pandas if you're in Python, which are data-oriented libraries. And then the next cell will be loading one or more CSV files or Excel spreadsheets or SQL-like databases, text files, what have you. And you basically hit the play button on each of these cells, and it'll run a little bit of Python code, and you just create more cells, and each cell is a block of code. You could write functions, and each cell can see variables and declarations and results in previous cells, and you just work your way down, and you can edit, save it, and like a notebook, you can share it, just as scientists will have a notebook of all their formulas and such and share with each other. So that's essentially what it is. It's completely shareable and open and all that goodness.
So where's the ideal place to live for the new tax plan?
Oh, well, it depends on what your homeowner is. And I swear I wasn't doing this for any political reason. I saw an opportunity to work with a moderately complex, not too huge data set, because there's states and some census data and numbers and something that I could kind of relate to, like I knew would make sense. If I got it wrong, I'd know it was off. If that makes sense. Like, okay, this isn't right. I did something wrong because nobody's paying 80% tax or whatever, So I couldn't answer that question. I can, and off the top of my head, because it varies based on the income level, and it really taught me, the main takeaway was, the two takeaways I got are, it's really easy to work with Jupyter notebooks, and it's going to get really hard to understand our tax system. Those are my two takeaways. So it's not going to get any simpler than it is now, I can tell you that. So.
Trying to cheer me up, it's not working.
What's that?
So if you're trying to cheer me up, it's not working.
So we'll go back to the Kaggle part. Yeah, it's really cool. And you can listen to metal or while you're working. So, any other questions?
We're a little over time, but we started late. I'm going to keep this easy. I wanted to do this more as like a seminar thing than. Can I move over here?
Yeah, absolutely.
Looks like somebody's statistics from the cards. Jack Queen. All right. Everybody know about the CIA triangle and information security, right? You all know about this, right? Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Confidentiality, in information security, basically the idea is get the information to the people who should have it, keep everybody else out when they need it. That takes care of this right here. So this morning, I'm riding in my cute little car down the cute little streets of Buffalo, trying to avoid the cute little police. And I hear them interviewing the president of Estonia about their new data system based on blockchain. Okay? They've got every piece of information about you electronically in their system based on blockchain, which means that they can monitor who's looking at your information and set up all kinds of triggers and all kinds of, okay. And then they were talking to him, and one of his positions, or the position of someone who informs him, is that this, what we've been working on, has been a model that protects confidentiality. And in the individual case, that is personal identification, this is privacy. He says, that's a mistake. That's not the big deal. The big one is integrity, okay? Because if you change that, you have changed life-threatening situations, okay? Basically, your personal information, very important. Somebody finds out about it, it's a problem. Getting your bank account hacked, real problem. Getting your blood type changed on your medical records is life-threatening, okay? So he's talking about this, and I thought to myself, wow, I wonder what the guys who do databases all the time would think about something like that. So that's what I want to throw open to the room. You understand the basic concepts and his example, but is he crazy? Because to me, once you get it, once you get past this, you're in real trouble. Okay? In order to get to integrity, I have to crack confidentiality. I think he's missing the whole point. Security is ephemeral and problematic. But you've got to start somewhere. I mean, there's attacks on all kinds of these things. And it's easy to think about an attack on confidentiality. You're going to get somebody's password, you're going to get into a database, you're going to go take all the information out and sell it to somebody else or use it for stock trades or whatever you're going to do it for. Easy to think about. Availability, easy. Easy to think about that. Denial of service attacks, or in what's actually happening, a distributed denial of service attacks. They overload the server, it's got too many requests, it crashes, nobody can get to their data, it's a problem. For businesses that deal with large amounts of money, can lose thousands of dollars a second, millions of dollars a second, okay? Integrity. Where's the big integrity attack going on? What's happening there? And then I thought about us. You guys all know what a SQL injection is, right? Yeah. SQL injection occurs, it's a specialized form of code injection. Anytime you have two languages talking to each other, there is an attack surface that, as far as I'm concerned, has never been closed. Never. When I give lectures on it at school, I usually wait for Halloween and put zombies on the screen and say, this is the breach that would not die. We are getting on to 20 years of SQL injections. Because every time they find a way around it, some bright boy in Shanghai or Chennai, India, or Chicago, or Sheboygan comes up with a way around it. Okay? So that, to me, is where the integrity attacks are going to occur. Is through SQL injection to drop tables, little Bobby tables. Everybody know about little Bobby tables? Okay. This, to me, is right up to the moment. I think, by the way, I think Bitcoin is going to explode. It's a bubble. It's going to explode like the Hindenburg. Because the one factor you cannot stop is that computers will never be totally secure as long as humans use them. And there's, they just lost another $70 billion somewhere in Asia because a password was disclosed. Okay?
this is a real problem. But right now, integrity, what else integrity? I was thinking of military data. If I can change map data, especially on the fly, especially for all kinds of targeting data, this is extremely important. So how do we protect this? And let me throw that open to the floor. Do you think, is he crazy or am I crazy? Well, I'm crazy anyway, but it doesn't matter. What do you guys think?
Was this guy from Estonia saying that they don't have to worry about confidentiality because the blockchain is
Because of the way their
giving them
data is structured,
integrity?
no one can actually see. He says, compared to what? Your privacy is compared to what? If your data is on paper, somebody can come in, look at the paper, take pictures of it, and you'll never know who had control, who had access to it. If I have all my data on a computer, even though people will get access to it, we'll know who got access to it. We'll know it was compromised. Your security was compromised. Your privacy was compromised. That's kind of where he was going with this.
Or if there's a problem, you can go backwards through the blockchain to find how it became
Yes.
so.
Rick, you're talking.
So it is good that they can, it sounds like they're the blockchain, they're thinking of the ledger, you know, so they can go back and see, it's good that they can see who had access, but it doesn't, they don't.
Doesn't stop them from doing it.
Right, you haven't prevented the breach in the first place, which is the thing that needs to be done. The blockchain, as far as we know, can't predict the future.
I think he's giving up. No, seriously, I think the guy's giving up. You're going to be breached. No, never fucking mind what. You're going to be breached. It's going to happen. You know, just what do you do to stop it? And that's where he's going with this. At least, you know, that's not what's expressed, but that's what I'm looking at.
So maybe not so much blockchain, but worked at a financial institution that's no longer around. And one of the things that they used to do with their item processing is they would have regular audits so that, you know, I scan a check, it's X amount of dollars. Did that actually match? Because that's obviously going to get reported up to the Fed and needs to be accounted for, and then you got to go back against your mainframe. Do all of those accounts match up? And you're going to do that at regular intervals throughout the day as well. So I think in the industry, you're always, at least in the banking industry, you're looking for an integrity. That is one of your things you're worried about. Now, can, you know, a bank teller who's not supposed to be getting at whatever information, getting certain bits of information, yeah, you're going to lose that on your, whatever the C1 was. But you've got to keep your controls in place for the integrity of the data, because that's people's money at the end of the day that you got to keep track of.
Yes.
So I think some industries, like the financial industry, that is a very big thing of what they're doing. That I don't think they've given up on trying to secure the information, but the goal at the end of the day is to make sure that everybody's money they're supposed to have, they have that money.
Get the right money to the right person at the right
Right.
time. Yeah, I get that part, yeah. The thing I was also thinking about was, I have a lot of threat feeds. Of, you know, one of the things is there's a group that has been taking money out of U.S. banks and Russian banks, and they're not really sure how they're doing it. Okay. I can post. I had an article I just skimmed before I came here. It's, you know, there's some serious amount. There's serious computing power going on behind this, but there's also the human element, the human factor. There's a great motivation. It's high risk because there's a great motivation to crack these systems. So, and again, like I said, the whole thing with the blockchain breach in South Korea, all it was one password got into the system. Somebody lateralized through the servers until they got to the right one, and then they were able to just dump the thing out. And it's not the first time that's happened, but it's the most. I think it's the most amount and the most recently publicized. So.
So I'm just thinking, like, in regard to, I used to work at a place where HIPAA laws were a big thing.
Oh, yeah.
And it's interesting because HIPAA laws are supposed to be all about confidentiality and keeping the integrity of your data.
Right.
Yet at the same time, when I walk in the doctor's office, they ask me my name, my phone number,
they ask me these things out loud, and anyone in that office
Yeah.
can hear what I'm saying. You know, and they ask me, like, I can't walk in and say, hi, I'm PJ, because that's not my real name. You know, they want my real name, and then I'm gonna say that out loud. Then they're gonna say, why are you here? And I'm gonna be like, well, I don't wanna say that out loud. And so, I think a lot of times, and this could be the case of the Estonian president, they think in a way that like we want to make things secure, but they don't think about the actual interactive security of it. And I think like that's how HIPAA in theory is very secure. Like once my records are stored in a database somewhere, theoretically they are secure. However, the integrity is dependent upon my verbal confirmation of things that I'm telling a person who may or may not know how to use a computer system.
Absolutely.
And meanwhile, is saying everything out loud to everyone in the room.
And having you write your social security number on a piece of
Yeah,
paper.
could you write your social security number on a piece of paper? Absolutely. This sounds good.
Yeah. What could go wrong?
Yeah, what could possibly fail?
Yeah.
And I think that's the point, is he's probably not, and I didn't hear him speak, but he's probably not thinking about the full line benefit of how people are going to interact with their public records and the multiple points of failure that could lead to before you even get to integrity, because
Right.
confidentiality is...
Even with them, 80 people can see your data.
Oh, yeah, easy.
But was he suggesting that anybody in Estonia could look at anybody's data?
No, that was what the interviewer asked, and he said no.
Okay, so there is a login thing where it
Yeah.
says you get access to
You don't,
this
yeah,
and not
it-
that.
you are, and your login very much restricts what you can see and where you can see, that sort of thing. And you have to be logged in order to access this data. So that tells you who's been looking, not only that it's been accessed, but who's accessed it, or at least whose account accessed it. But if you're interested, I'm sure it's on npr.org, and if I find the link, I'll post it in the group. But I was just, it totally threw me when I heard it. Holy shit. What do you think?
Yeah. Sorry,
So it's just interesting that this is coming out of Estonia, because I want to say I've been hearing and reading a couple of things that Estonia is billing themselves as some kind of e-state.
That's what I was going to mention. Yeah, they actually, you can get e-citizenship in Estonia, but I think you pay like €50 or something like that. And you don't get a passport or anything, but you can technically, legally say that you are a citizen of Estonia and like establish a bank account and buy real estate.
It's like
fucking bizarre.
It's your avatar.
Yeah, your avatar. Yeah, you have an avatar of a citizen in Estonia.
But for 50 euros, hey.
You know, the thing about Estonia, and they're like the most heavily computerized state in Eastern Europe, and perhaps even in Western Europe too. But it made them terribly vulnerable when the Russians had a tussle with them in the 90s over, well, long story short, it turned out to be the first shots in what many consider to be the first cyber war. Okay? They got hit with a massive DDoS attack from Nashi, which is a youth group. It's like, imagine the fucking Boy Scouts sending out DDoS things to all of their groups and everybody, all right, for your merit badge, we're going to attack Estonia, right? There's an article on Michael Medvedev called An Army of Ones and Zeros. Your disturbed denial of service attack is using your populace to give the denial of service attacks to a foreign country, and it was pretty impressive at the time. But yeah, this has real world consequences too. Yeah, I didn't know about the total e-state thing. An army of ones and zeros. I love that.
Didn't Dilbert
What if
work
we
in
can give
Estonia?
the layer of entity intelligent enough to classify which is a threat and which is not a threat?
That would be a different story entirely. You know, what if? What ifs are good. I like what ifs.
What did you mean by he was giving up?
If you're saying that, all right, the security model is generally concentric rings, you know, of security, you know, and the castle, right? So we have different layers of security. Defense in depth is what it's called. To me, if your big thing is you have to protect this above all else, that means at some level you have decided then this is going to fail.
But that's mathematically provable that it's gonna fail.
I understand that. But you have to try.
Right,
Because
but
if you
it's a
don't,
lot
look,
easier
I
to-
used to do FISMA when I was at the Federal Trade Commission. I did FISMA. You know what FISMA is?
No.
Federal Information Security Management Act. It's like Gramm-Leach-Bliley for the government, right? And it is a paperwork exercise. And it's derided as a paperwork exercise, especially by other security professionals. But I'm telling you right now, I worked for the government. Paperwork is the air they live and breathe. If you didn't make them do that paperwork exercise, we would have no security controls at all. We would have nothing. It's not always the most effective, but 99% of your successful attacks could have been prevented by basic security measures. Okay? This is why when somebody works for the government, or you vend as a vendor for the government, they have to follow the security rules in FISMA. Because the idea, and it's a good idea, is that if you give the government your information, they should treat it like they treat their information. That's the idea. Does it always work? No. Does everything always work? No. And yes, eventually, by the time the heat death of the universe comes around, everything will be cracked. All cryptography will be cracked, right? But you got to try, because most things are not sophisticated attacks. Most things, I refer to the internet for information security as the infinite number of monkeys, right? You know the statistic probability, infinite number if you have an infinite number of monkeys hitting an infinite number of typewriters, eventually they'll come up with the script for Hamlet. So one will come up with the script for Hamlet. And the infinite number of monkeys, sooner or later, will come up and crack your system. They will. And that's why you were talking about innovation. That's what you're fighting against.
Everything.
The infinite number of monkeys. It's really. So that's really all I had, and I didn't want to keep us longer than necessary. Just wanted to get feedback from the group. So thank you very much.
Well, thanks everybody for coming out. Stay, chat, snack, talk, whatever.
I have the e-residency stuff for Estonia up if anyone wants.
Seriously, post it in the comments on.
I'm gonna see if I can.
It's like for business purposes. Like they're like, if you establish yourself as an e-resident, you can open a business in less than 24 hours in Estonia and be an EU citizen business.
Oh Jesus!
Did they
Oh
say
my God, it's shady as shit. I love it.
You got your citizenship already?
Yeah, that's why I was typing while I was talking.
What do you look like when you're there?
No, I was at a conference where I saw this, and I was like, giant billboards, like, become an e-citizen of Estonia. I'm like, what in the Christ?
I wonder if that's Estonia.
It's the Estonia.
Oh, is that Hammerstein?
Yeah, oh no, we got all those recorded, so we'll make sure that we highlight those.
Should I?
Yeah, I think so. So yeah, watch for the whatever our next meetup's going to be, and if anybody's got a talk in mind, let me know.